While I planned our wedding, he married his mistress. I wasn't even supposed to be there that night. My best friend had been begging me all week to attend her engagement party, but I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. I'd had one of those weeks that made you question everything, your job, your choices, your life. All I wanted was a quiet evening with a cup of tea and my blanket. But she wouldn't take no for an answer. "Please just show up for me. You don't even have to stay long," she said. So I went. The place was beautiful, glowing lights, soft music, and laughter that felt contagious. Everyone seemed happy, coupled up, radiant. And me, I was just another tired guest trying to survive the night without being reminded of how single I was. Then it happened. While reaching for a glass of red wine, my elbow brushed against someone's arm, and before I knew it, the wine splashed all over his white shirt. I gasped, mortified. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." He looked down at his shirt, then at me, and instead of anger, he laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that caught me completely off guard. "It's okay," he said, still smiling. "At least now we're officially introduced. I'm Richard, the guy whose shirt you just murdered." I couldn't help but laugh. He had this calm confidence, the kind that made you feel at ease even in embarrassing moments. He was tall, neatly dressed, with eyes that felt like they could read too much about you in one glance. We started talking casually at first, then easily, then deeply. Before I knew it, we were tucked away in a corner, laughing like old friends. He told me about his work, his family, his love for travel. I told him about my small bakery business and how stressful it was preparing wedding cakes for other people while still waiting for my own love story. He smiled and said, "Maybe you just haven't met the right person to bake for yet." The way he said it made something flutter inside me. When the music slowed, he held out his hand and asked, "May I?" I hesitated, but he waited patiently, and that somehow made me say yes. We danced, awkwardly at first, then smoothly. His hand rested lightly on my waist, and for the first time in a long time I felt seen. Not looked at, not admired, seen. When it was time to leave, he offered to walk me to my car. I tried to decline politely, but he insisted gently. "Let me make up for the shirt," he said, smiling again. Under the soft glow of the streetlight, he asked for my number. Not in the pushy, careless way men often do, but like someone who already knew I'd say yes. That night, when I got home, his message came almost immediately. "Got home safe. Hope you did too," wine criminal grinning face with smiling eyes. I laughed out loud, and for the first time in a long while, I went to bed smiling. He called the next day, then the next, then every day after that. He brought me flowers, sent sweet messages, showed up at my bakery just to keep me company. He was kind, patient, attentive, everything I thought I'd been waiting for. My friends teased me, saying, "This one is serious, oh don't go and lose him." I didn't plan to, because somehow, in my heart, I had already chosen him. If only I had known what was waiting ahead. The lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak hidden behind that beautiful smile. Maybe I would have walked away that night. But love doesn't warn you. It blinds you first, and lets you see only when it's too late. I used to think love was supposed to feel like fireworks, loud, bright, impossible to ignore. But with Richard, it wasn't like that. It was quiet, steady, safe. He didn't rush me. He didn't push. He just showed up consistently, gently, until he became a part of my everyday. He would pick me up from work with that warm smile that always melted my defenses. Sometimes he'd wait outside my bakery, sitting in his car with the engine off, scrolling through his phone, just to drive me home. Other times, he'd surprise me with lunch, saying, "I figured you'd forget to eat again." He remembered the little things, how I liked my tea, how I hated phone calls in the morning, how I always bit my lip when I was nervous. And the way he looked at me, it was as if I was something fragile he didn't want to break. Everyone said I was lucky, and honestly, I believed them. He was the kind of man mothers prayed for their daughters to meet, well-spoken, ambitious, and kind. He ran his own business, traveled often, and still made time to check on me. My parents adored him. My friends adored him. Even my pastor smiled when I brought him to church and said, "You two look like a testimony in progress." Looking back now, maybe that's what blinded me, how perfect everything looked from the outside. We started spending weekends together, cooking, watching movies, attending weddings, talking about our future. He told me he'd been praying for a woman like me. I laughed, thinking he was just being sweet. But then one evening, while sitting under the mango tree behind my house, he took my hands and said, "You don't understand. You bring peace to my chaos. I want to build my life around that peace." And just like that, I fell deeper. The proposal came on my birthday. I remember the moment so clearly it still hurts to think about it. He had taken me to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city lights. There was a violinist playing softly in the background. The waiter brought out dessert, and when I lifted the cover, there it was, a ring box resting in the middle of the plate. I looked up, and there he was, already on one knee. He smiled, that same calm, confident smile that had made me fall for him in the first place, and said, "You're the one, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." I cried, everyone clapped, and when I said yes, he kissed my hand and whispered, "You'll never regret this, I promise." If only promises could keep hearts pure. The next few months were a blur of excitement and planning. We visited venues, tried out catering services, took pre-wedding photos that looked straight out of a fairy tale. He was involved in every detail, or at least, that's what I thought. He'd hold my hand during meetings, call me Mrs. Soon-to-be, and tell everyone how blessed he was to have me. There were moments when I caught him staring at me quietly, as if memorizing my face. When I'd ask, "What?" he'd smile and say, "Just thinking about how lucky I am." I thought I was lucky too. But beneath all that charm, something subtle had begun to shift, little things I didn't notice until later. The way he avoided eye contact when his phone rang. The way he'd step outside to take calls, saying, "It's work, babe." The sudden business trips that became more frequent and lasted longer. At first, I didn't question it. He was a businessman, after all, always busy, always chasing deals. He'd call me at night, sounding tired but affectionate, saying things like, "You don't know how much I miss you," or "I wish I could teleport to you right now." And I believed him. I told myself that love required trust, that I shouldn't be one of those paranoid women who think every absence means betrayal. So I smiled through it, prayed for him, and even packed snacks for his trips. He would return with gifts, perfumes, scarves, bracelets, each one wrapped neatly, each one meant to say, "See, I was thinking of you." But there were signs, faint ones, like whispers I refused to hear. The lipstick mark that he said was from hugging his cousin at a party. The late-night text that flashed across his phone, "I miss you already." The hotel keycard that belonged to his colleague. I ignored them all, because I wanted to believe that love, our love, was different, that he couldn't possibly hurt me when he'd been so good to me. Now, when I think back on those days, I realize he was perfect, just not for me. He was perfect at pretending, perfect at lying, perfect at building an image of the man I wanted while hiding the man he truly was. And I, foolishly in love, was too blinded by the illusion to see the truth forming right in front of me. I remember the night he proposed like it happened yesterday. The way my heart raced, the way my hands trembled, the way I thought my whole world was falling perfectly into place. It was my birthday. He told me to dress nicely, but refused to say where we were going. "Just trust me," he said with that smile that always melted me, and I trusted him completely. He drove us to a rooftop restaurant in the city. Everything sparkled, candles flickering on every table, fairy lights strung across the railings, and soft jazz music floating in the air. I remember thinking how lucky I was, how everything finally seemed right in my life. We talked, laughed, shared stories. He held my hand the entire time, occasionally brushing his thumb over my fingers, as if reassuring me that I was safe, that I was loved. Then, just before dessert, the music changed. The waiter brought out a plate covered with a silver lid. When I lifted it, my breath caught there, sitting in the middle of the plate, was a small velvet box. I froze. The room went silent, except for the soft murmur of music and the pounding of my heart. When I looked up, Richard was already kneeling beside me, eyes shining under the golden light. He took my trembling hand and said, "From the moment you spilled wine on me, I knew my life was about to get messy, but the kind of messy I wanted to keep forever." Everyone around us laughed softly. I could barely see through my tears. He continued, "You've brought peace, laughter, and purpose into my life. I want to spend every day proving that you made the right choice loving me. So please make me the happiest man alive. Marry me." There are moments in life when time just stops, and that was one of them. All I could do was nod, my voice breaking as I said yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger and kissed it, and the room erupted into cheers. Strangers clapped. The waiter brought champagne. The violinist played a slow, romantic tune, and Richard held me close, whispering, "You'll never regret this, my love. I'll protect you with everything I have." I believed him, every word. That night I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ring, smiling, replaying every second of the proposal. He called me before midnight, his voice soft and tired. "Are you still awake?" "Yes," I whispered. "Good," he said, "because I can't stop smiling either." We talked until I fell asleep with the phone still pressed to my ear. The days that followed felt like a dream. We started planning immediately, the colors, the location, the guest list. He was so involved, so enthusiastic. He wanted to know everything, the design of my dress, the flower arrangements, the music playlist. Every time I looked at him, I thought, this is how love is supposed to feel. He even came to church with me the Sunday after the proposal. The pastor called us to the front, prayed for our union, and everyone cheered. My mother cried, saying, "God finally answered my prayers." And I believed he had. There was a night, though, about a week after, when he seemed distant. We were sitting on my couch, discussing the venue options when his phone kept buzzing. He glanced at it quickly, then turned it face down. I noticed, but I said nothing. "Everything okay?" I asked. He smiled. "Just work, baby. You know how clients can be." I nodded. Of course, I knew. He was a busy man. I didn't want to seem insecure, so I pushed the thought away. That became the pattern, little things that didn't make sense, moments where he'd drift away mentally, only to return seconds later with that same charming smile. Once, while driving home from a meeting with the decorator, I looked at him and said, "Sometimes I still can't believe this is happening." He chuckled, eyes on the road. "Believe it, sweetheart, you're stuck with me now." I laughed, completely unaware of how painfully true those words would become, because in ways I didn't yet understand, I was stuck. Stuck in a web of lies so carefully spun that love blinded me from every warning sign. He was everything I'd ever prayed for: gentle, patient, generous, spiritual. A man who knelt to pray with me, but also knelt beside another woman and made the same promises. But back then, I didn't know that. All I knew was that I was engaged to the man of my dreams, and every time I looked at him, I saw forever. I didn't realize that forever, for him, had an expiration date. I woke up the morning after the proposal with the ring still on my finger, sunlight glinting off the diamond, as if it wanted to remind me that this was real. I wasn't just somebody's girlfriend anymore, I was a fiancé, his fiancé. I spent hours staring at my reflection that day, tracing the curve of the ring with trembling fingers and whispering to myself, "This is forever." It felt like the beginning of everything I'd ever wanted. Richard and I threw ourselves into wedding plans almost immediately. He said he wanted us to have a celebration people would talk about for years, 2,000 guests, a cathedral wedding, and a reception that screamed elegance. He called it our dream, and I loved that he included me in everything. We picked colors, gold and ivory. We argued over flowers. He preferred roses, I wanted lilies. We spent long nights scrolling through decor ideas, comparing photographers, choosing the right band for the reception. Every decision felt like a piece of the future we were building together. He was attentive, affectionate, everything a bride-to-be could hope for. When I got overwhelmed, he'd pull me close and say, "Relax, baby. You don't need to stress. Just show up and be beautiful. I'll handle the rest." And I believed him, because that's what he always did, handled things. He had a way of taking charge that made me feel safe. He knew all the right words, when to say them, and how to make me laugh when I was tired. My friends would tease me, saying, "You hit the jackpot, girl. This one is a rare breed." And I'd smile, proud and grateful, never knowing that I was admiring a masterpiece of pretense. We started house hunting together. He said he wanted something modern, cozy, and big enough for the kids. Kids? He was already talking about our future family, the number of children, the schools they'd attend, even what kind of father he wanted to be. Sometimes he'd hold my hand and say, "I can't wait to see you carrying our first child." Those words melted me every time. We even attended premarital counseling at my church. He answered every question so perfectly that the pastor said, "You too are ready. You have a solid foundation." I smiled proudly, thinking God himself had written our story. But slowly, the cracks began to show, faint at first, then clearer with time. It started with the phone calls he'd take outside, always claiming they were work-related. Then came the late nights, the urgent meetings, the sudden business trips that popped up out of nowhere. He'd call to say, "Babe, I have to travel for a few days. Don't miss me too much." And I'd smile into the phone, pretending not to feel that twist in my stomach. Because why would I suspect anything? We were about to get married. He had no reason to lie, right? Still, I noticed things. The perfume on his shirt that wasn't mine. The lipstick stain he claimed came from a client's hug. The tiredness in his eyes when he came back from those trips, as though he was living a double life and struggling to keep up. Sometimes I'd ask softly, "Are you okay?" And he'd smile, that same beautiful, reassuring smile, and say, "Of course, my love, just tired. I'm doing all this for us." For us. Those words silenced every doubt. When I talked to my mother about the stress of planning, she said, "You're lucky, my daughter. Most men leave everything for the woman. Be grateful he's involved." So I was. I convinced myself that all his busyness was a sign of responsibility, that he was working hard to secure our future. What I didn't know was that those business trips weren't about work at all. They were about her. The other woman. The one he had been building another future with, even as he stood beside me, talking about ours. But I didn't know that yet. Back then, all I saw was a man who loved me, a man who was going to be my husband. I saw wedding invitations and dancing guests, not deception. I saw the promise of forever, not the shadow of betrayal that was slowly creeping in, waiting for the perfect day to reveal itself. If I had known that my dream of forever was just the prelude to a nightmare, maybe I would have paid more attention to the silence between his words, to the little gaps where truth used to live before lies took over. But I didn't. I was too busy loving him, too busy planning forever with a man who had already promised it to someone else. The first red flag didn't come with sirens or warnings. It came quietly, tucked between laughter, affection, and all the little ways he made me feel safe. It was a Tuesday evening. We had just finished a meeting with the decorator, finalizing the color palette and centerpiece arrangements. Richard had been unusually quiet throughout the drive home, distracted, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, glancing at his phone every few seconds. I tried to make light conversation, talking about the cake design and the guest list, but he barely responded. His mind was elsewhere. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen quickly, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression, a mix of surprise and guilt. When he noticed I was watching, he turned the phone face down and smiled. "Work stuff," he said lightly, kissing the back of my hand. "You know how demanding clients can be." I nodded, pretending not to notice that his voice had changed. It was softer, too careful. That night after he dropped me off, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My instincts whispered that something was off, but my heart scolded me for even doubting him. "You're just tired," I told myself. "You're overthinking again." But red flags don't fade just because you choose to ignore them. The next weekend, he said he had to travel to Abuja for a business deal. 3 days only, he promised. I'll be back before Sunday service. I smiled, kissed him goodbye, and waved as his car disappeared down the street. But on the third day, he didn't return. No call, no text, nothing. When I finally reached him, his voice was cheerful, a little too cheerful. Hey baby, I was just about to call you. The meeting been extended. I'll be back on Tuesday. Oh, I said quietly. Everything okay? Perfect, he replied. Just work, you know. But I didn't know. Because when he came back, I noticed a new wristwatch, expensive, elegant, one I hadn't seen before. Nice watch, I said, trying to sound casual. He smiled. A gift from a client. Male or female, I teased. He laughed, not answering. It was a small thing, but my spirit didn't let it go. Another week passed, and he became more secretive. His phone, once casually left on the table, was now always in his pocket. He started turning off his notifications and locking the screen more often. If it rang, he'd excuse himself, saying, "Let me take this outside." At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself every relationship has seasons, maybe he was just stressed. But deep down, I felt something shifting, something I couldn't name but couldn't deny. Then came the night I found it. We were supposed to go for dinner. I'd gotten dressed early, wearing the red dress he loved so much. He called at the last minute to say he'd be late. I'm stuck in traffic, he said. Give me 30 minutes. I sighed and decided to tidy up a bit while waiting. His jacket was hanging over the chair. So I picked it up to hang it properly. That's when something fell out of the pocket, a lipstick. Not just any lipstick, a bright coral shade I'd never worn in my life. For a long time, I just stared at it, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. When he finally arrived, I asked him about it. He didn't even flinch. Oh, that. My sister borrowed my jacket the other day, must be hers. His tone was so casual, so natural that I almost believed him. Almost. But that night, as I lay beside him, pretending to sleep, I noticed how quickly he drifted off, peaceful, unbothered, while my mind raced with questions. Who was she? Where did he go on those trips? And why, if everything was so perfect, did my heart suddenly feel like it was holding its breath? I wanted to confront him, to demand the truth, but I couldn't. I was scared, not of losing him, but of confirming what my heart already knew. So I did what so many women do when the first red flag appears. I folded it neatly, tucked it into a corner of my heart, and told myself it wasn't worth ruining something so beautiful over a little misunderstanding. I had no idea that that tiny red flag was only the beginning. The first ripple in a storm that would one day drown everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and forever. It started with excuses, small, harmless at first. Babe, I have a late meeting tonight. Sorry, I couldn't pick your call. My phone was on silent. I'll come over tomorrow, I promise. Tomorrow, always tomorrow. At first, I didn't think much of it. Richard was ambitious, driven, and deeply passionate about his job. He'd always told me he was building something bigger for us, a future where we'd never have to worry about money. So I smiled, nodded, and said the words every loyal woman says when her heart begins to ache quietly. I understand. But understanding turned into waiting, and waiting became a routine. He stopped showing up at my bakery like he used to. The man who once surprised me with lunch every Friday suddenly became too busy to even text until midnight. When he did, it was always short. Just got in. Tired. Talk tomorrow. I began to memorize the pattern of his absence. Mondays and Wednesdays, he'd say he had out-of-town meetings. Fridays, he'd be too exhausted for dinner. Sundays, he'd slip out of church early, claiming he had to see a client. And yet, despite all these absences, the wedding plans never stopped. He still spoke about venues, catering, and honeymoon destinations, just not with the same excitement. It felt like he was going through the motions, doing everything right on the surface while his heart drifted somewhere else. One afternoon, I decided to surprise him at his office. It wasn't unusual. I'd done it before, brought lunch, stayed a while, chatted with his colleagues. But that day, when I arrived, his secretary looked confused. "Mr. Richard," she said, flipping through her schedule. "He's not in today. He traveled for a business meeting." I blinked. Traveled, but he told me he was working in the office all day. She frowned slightly. Oh, maybe it was a last-minute trip. Last minute. That phrase became my new enemy. On my way home, I stared at my phone, scrolling through our old messages, the ones filled with affection and promises. He used to text, "Can't wait to see you." Now it was just talk later. Later never came. When I tried to talk about it, he'd draw me close, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "Baby, don't do this. You know I love you. You know how stressful work gets." His voice was so calm, so convincing, that guilt would wash over me for even suspecting him. Maybe he really was working hard. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe love just looked different when life got serious. So I told myself that distance was normal, that every couple went through phases like this. I buried my doubts beneath the excitement of wedding preparations, the dress fittings, the invitations, the food tasting. But each time I looked at him, I noticed how his eyes seemed far away, like he was always somewhere else, thinking of something I couldn't reach. He started traveling more often, always on business, always with vague details. And I, the woman who once asked 1,000 questions, stopped asking any. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of what his answers might reveal. So I smiled, I cooked, I planned the wedding of our dreams. And at night, I lay awake beside my phone, waiting for a message that never came. Love had become a quiet ache, one that lived between the spaces of excuses and distance. And though a part of me still hoped I was wrong, another part, the wiser, wounded part, had already started preparing for the truth. Because deep down I knew. A man doesn't change his routine, that completely, unless someone else has become part of it. But instead of confronting him, I chose silence. Because sometimes, silence hurts less than hearing a lie spoken out loud. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw it, the first undeniable trace of betrayal. Richard had asked me to help him with his laptop. "The system keeps freezing," he'd said casually. "Maybe you can check it while I shower." He trusted me enough to hand it over, or maybe he thought I wouldn't look too deep. Either way, I opened it with a smile, humming softly as I waited for it to start. The screen blinked to life, and there it was, a message notification in the corner. I wasn't even trying to pry, it just appeared before me. A name I didn't recognize. Nora Rudd Hutt. The preview line said, "I can't wait to see you again, love." Counting down already fuss blung a cuss. For a moment, I froze. My heart stuttered, then raced so fast I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to close the laptop, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but my trembling fingers betrayed me. I clicked. And the truth poured out in blue and gray bubbles. Messages, pictures, voice notes. Long conversations filled with affection and familiarity, the kind that only lovers share. They spoke about secret dinners, weekend getaways, plans for the future. She called him my king, and he replied with my queen. I read in silence, tears sliding down my cheeks as I scrolled through the memories of a life that wasn't mine. The same man who told me he was working late had been in hotel rooms with her. The same man who said he couldn't text because of meetings had been whispering sweet nothings to another woman. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop or call him out. Instead, I closed it slowly and sat there, numb. When he came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, he smiled. "You fixed it." I nodded, forcing my lips into something that resembled a smile. "Yes, it's fine now." He kissed my forehead, thanked me, and went on dressing, humming, carefree, as if the universe hadn't just exposed his betrayal right in front of me. That night I lay in his arms and listened to the sound of his breathing. Steady, peaceful, like a man with nothing to hide. I wanted to ask why, but the question stuck in my throat. What would he even say? That it was a mistake, that it meant nothing. Instead, I turned my pain into silence. I smiled when he smiled, laughed when he laughed, and made mental notes of every lie he told afterward. When he said, "I'm traveling to Abuja next week," I smiled, remembering the messages he sent her about that same trip. When he texted me, "Good night, my love," I imagined him lying beside her, typing those words with the same fingers that once brushed tears from my face. Every "I love you" became a knife. Every kiss felt rehearsed. Every promise, poison wrapped in silk. But still, I said nothing. Because I wanted him to dig his own grave. I wanted to see how far he would go, how long he would pretend. So I let him plan the wedding. I let him smile for photos, talk to vendors, and hold my hand in public. I let him believe his lies were working. But inside me, something had shifted quietly, permanently. Love had turned to ice. My heart had stopped beating for him. And though he didn't know it yet, the day he vowed to be mine forever would be the same day I'd expose everything. The same day the world would see him for who he truly was. Her name was Nora, and she was everything I wasn't trying to be. Loud laughter, bold lipstick, body-hugging dresses that announced her presence before her words ever did. I found her one evening, not by accident, but by intention. After weeks of silent investigation, I had learned enough. The name, the company she worked for, even the restaurant where they liked to meet. She wasn't a ghost in his phone anymore. She was real. I watched her from across the cafe that day. She walked in with confidence, scrolling through her phone before sitting at the corner table. A few minutes later, Richard arrived late, as usual. He smiled at her the way he used to smile at me, and I swear, for a second, my heart cracked like glass. He pulled her chair out, kissed her cheek, and sat close. Too close. They talked. They laughed. She touched his arm, and he didn't pull away. From my table, I stirred my drink slowly, pretending to be lost in thought while my eyes recorded every gesture, every glance, every betrayal. At one point, Nora looked around. Maybe she felt someone watching. Her eyes swept the room, brushed past me, and then returned to him. I looked down, hiding behind my sunglasses, my pulse drumming in my throat. It was surreal, sitting there, watching the man who had promised me forever whispering to another woman like she was his whole world. But instead of pain, I felt a strange calm. Cold, sharp, and steady. The kind that comes when you realize you've lost something that was never really yours. When they left, I followed discreetly, just long enough to see them get into his car. He opened the door for her, his hand resting on the small of her back, the same gesture he once reserved for me. That night, I lay awake and replayed every detail in my mind. Not out of heartbreak anymore, but out of purpose. I needed to know how far he'd go. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I didn't even call a friend to rant. I simply wrote everything down. Times, dates, photos, receipts. Quietly building my truth in a world full of his lies. Because I knew someday, all of it would matter. From that day on, I became two people. To him, I was still the doting fiancée, gentle, understanding, and patient. I still called to check on him, sent lunch to his office, and smiled when he came around. But behind that calm exterior, I was watching, listening, recording. Every lie he told became another thread in the web he was weaving around himself. When he said, "I'll be at the conference in Abuja," I checked his car tracker and saw he never left town. When he said, "I was home all evening," I saw pictures of him online, a tagged photo from Nora's birthday dinner. Still, I said nothing. Silence became my weapon. The more he lied, the more careful I became. The quieter I grew, the more reckless he became. He started slipping up, forgetting stories he'd told, mixing dates, leaving traces of her perfume on his clothes. Once, I found a hotel key card in his wallet. I placed it back where I found it and kissed him goodbye the next morning as if nothing was wrong. I smiled when he spoke about our future, knowing he was already building another one behind my back. My friends would say, "You're so lucky, he's such a good man," and I'd nod, holding back the bitter laugh threatening to escape. But I wasn't broken anymore. I was patient. I was preparing. The wedding plans continued. The guests multiplied. The invitations went out. And all the while, he had no idea that I knew everything. He thought he was winning, balancing 2 lives, 2 women, 2 lies. But I was only waiting for one perfect moment, the day the world would see the man he truly was. I found out by accident, or maybe fate decided I'd endured enough lies. It was a week before our wedding. I had gone to the church to finalize some details with the event planner. The receptionist, a kind woman named Mrs. Grace, smiled at me as I approached. "Ah, you again," she said warmly. "We've had so many weddings lately. Your groom must really love this place, second time booking this month." "Second time," I frowned. "What do you mean?" She blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you knew. Mr. Richard had another ceremony here just 3 weeks ago. A small one, just family, I think." My blood ran cold. "With who?" She checked her records, scrolling through the registry. Let me see. Yes, it says Richard Ackeffer and Nora James." The room spun. My hands trembled so badly I had to grip the counter to stay upright. She kept talking, unaware she had just ripped my world apart. Such a beautiful couple, very private. I remember her tall, fair, pretty lady. They said it was a civil union, but it looked like a wedding to me. I didn't hear anything else. I just stood there, numb, staring at the floor as realization sank in. While I'd been busy planning our grand wedding, Richard had already married his mistress in secret. The business trips, the late nights, the distance, all of it had been cover for a ceremony that made him another woman's husband. And yet he still came to me, still kissed me, still pretended. That evening he called as usual, his voice smooth and sweet. "Hey baby, just checking in. Everything good for Saturday?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "Perfect," I said softly. "Everything's perfect." He laughed. "Good, I can't wait to see you walk down that aisle." Neither could I. Because that aisle, the one he thought would mark the beginning of our forever, was where I planned to end his lies for good. In front of 2,000 guests, family, friends, and cameras, I would give him the kind of wedding he'd never forget. Not one of love, but of truth, shame, and justice. That night after leaving the church office, I sat alone in my car, the world spinning around me. The city lights blurred through my tears, and the air inside the car felt too heavy to breathe. I wanted to scream, to break something, to drive to his house and demand an explanation, but I didn't. I just sat there, silent, staring at nothing. It wasn't the shock that hurt the most. It was the clarity. Suddenly, everything made sense, the lies, the trips, the late-night messages, the strange excuses. He wasn't just cheating. He was married. Legally, secretly, proudly, to another woman. He had looked me in the eyes and talked about our wedding plans while still wearing another woman's ring on his finger. My mind replayed every "I love you," every "you're my forever," and it made me sick. How easily he had fooled me, how easily I had believed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my window, watching the sky turn from black to gray, my heart hardening with each passing minute. By morning, I had stopped crying. Something inside me had died, the version of me that loved him, trusted him, defended him. All that was left was silence, and a calm so deep it scared me. That was the night I stopped being his victim. That was the night I decided he would not get away with it. The days that followed were a performance. I smiled, laughed, sent messages filled with love and emojis. I met with vendors, finalized the cake design, and even sent him pictures of wedding decorations. To everyone else, I was a joyful bride counting down to her big day. To him, I was still the woman hopelessly in love. Inside, though, I was cold, calculating, watchful, waiting. He had no idea that I knew everything. When he spoke about honeymoon destinations, I nodded and pretended to be excited. When he joked about our forever, I held his hand and smiled sweetly. He mistook my silence for submission, my softness for blindness. But behind every word I said, there was a plan. Sometimes I'd catch myself studying him, the way his mouth curved when he lied, how easily he shifted from charm to indifference. He'd answer a call and step outside, and I'd listen to his fatting voice, wondering if he was speaking to her again. He thought he was the clever one. but I was watching every move, memorizing every detail. When people asked if I was nervous about the wedding, I'd chuckle and say, "Just excited." And I was not because I was marrying him, but because I was preparing for his undoing. Each night, as I lay on my bed, I'd whisper to myself soon. The guest list became my masterpiece. 2,000 names, friends, family, business partners, church members, neighbors, and media personalities. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the world to see the man behind the mask. When my event planner asked if I was sure about the number, I said, "Yes, I want it to be big, a wedding to remember." I made sure his parents were seated at the front, his colleagues at the second row, and his precious Nora. Oh yes, she would get an invitation too. Anonymously, of course. After all, it wouldn't be a proper show if the leading actress didn't attend. I sent out the invitations with trembling hands, but a steady heart. Each one felt like another piece of my revenge falling perfectly into place. While he rehearsed vows and smiled through pre-wedding photos, I rehearsed the truth I would reveal. Every time he said, "I can't wait to make you my wife," I smiled, thinking, "You already have one." The wedding wasn't just a ceremony anymore. It was justice dressed in white satin, and I was ready to deliver it. The morning of the wedding came bright and golden, the kind of day poets would describe as perfect, but perfection was the last thing I felt. I woke up before dawn, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my wedding gown hanging by the window. It shimmered softly in the early light, delicate and beautiful, a gown meant for a woman in love. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was something else entirely. My bridesmaids were all excitement and laughter, rushing in and out of the room with makeup brushes and curling irons, singing love songs, taking pictures. I smiled when they looked at me, let them believe I was just nervous. Inside, my heart was a battlefield, steady, determined, unflinching. When my mother walked in, she touched my face gently. "You look beautiful, my daughter. Today is your day." I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, Mama, today is my day." If only she knew how true those words were. By the time we arrived at the venue, the hall was already buzzing. Over 2,000 guests, family, friends, church members, business partners, cameras flashing everywhere. People whispered about how stunning the setup looked, how perfect the couple seemed, how blessed we must be. And then there he was, Richard, standing at the altar, dashing in his suit, smiling that confident smile that once made me weak. For a moment I almost pitied him, almost. The ceremony began. Music filled the air, my father held my hand, and I walked down the aisle slowly, every step heavy with purpose. Guests turned to admire me, some wiping tears, others recording. When I reached him, Richard took my hand, his eyes soft. "You look like a dream," he whispered. I smiled faintly. Dreams end eventually. The pastor spoke. There were prayers, vows, and then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the exchange of rings. He slid mine onto my finger, confident, smiling for the cameras. Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, turned to the crowd, and said, "Before I place this ring on his finger, there's something I need to say." The hall fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I could feel his confusion beside me, the pastor's hesitation, the crowd's anticipation. I looked at Richard, then at the guests, faces filled with expectation and joy. "My name is Amara," I began slowly, my voice steady. "And today I was supposed to become Mrs. Richard Ackeffer." A murmur rippled through the room. "But it seems," I continued, my voice rising slightly, "that I cannot marry a man who is already married." Gasps, loud, sharp, rippling through the audience like thunder. I turned to the large screen behind us and nodded to the technician I had spoken to earlier. The projector came alive, showing pictures, Richard and Nora, hand in hand, hugging, kissing, and finally standing before the same church altar 3 weeks earlier, exchanging vows. Screams, whispers, cameras flashing. Richard froze, color draining from his face. "Amara, please," he started, but I raised my hand. "No, you've spoken enough lies." I looked at the crowd again, my heart pounding but my voice calm. This man planned 2 weddings, one for his mistress and one for me. While I prepared to be his wife, he was already someone else's husband. The pastor stepped back in shock. His mother buried her face in her hands. His father looked away, shaking his head. I turned back to him, tears finally filling my eyes. I loved you, I believed you, but you turned that love into a joke. Then I took off the ring, dropped it on the floor, and stepped back. Congratulations, Richard. You've been exposed before God and man. The hall erupted, chaos, disbelief, people shouting, others filming. He tried to reach for me, but I moved away, my bridesmaids rushing to my side. I lifted my chin, wiped my tears, and walked out of that hall, not as a broken bride, but as a woman who had chosen her dignity over deceit. The cameras followed, flashes bright and endless. Reporters whispered, guests stared, but I didn't care. Because the wedding that was supposed to destroy me had become the day I reclaimed my strength. The day I walked away from betrayal and never looked back. The pastor's voice echoed softly through the microphone, his tone warm and steady. And now we'll proceed to the vows. I stood there, my palms slightly damp inside the lace gloves, heart thudding in rhythm with the murmurs of the crowd. The lights from the cameras felt too bright, almost blinding, but I kept my eyes fixed on him, the man who had promised me forever. Richard smiled at me like nothing in the world existed beyond that altar. The guests watched with admiration, whispering about how in love we looked. He took the microphone, adjusted it, and began. "My love," he said softly, his voice trembling just the way people expect from a groom overwhelmed with emotion. "From the moment I met you, I knew." He stopped. Because in that very instant, the screen behind us flickered to life, not with the words of the vow, but with the truth. Photos began to appear, one after another. Him and Nora, in matching outfits, at a beach resort, at the registry, holding marriage certificates. The hall fell into stunned silence. Even the air seemed to leave the room. I hadn't said a word yet. I just stood there, watching him freeze, his mouth hanging open mid-vow, the microphone slipping from his hand. Whispers began to swell into gasps. People turned to each other in disbelief. Some pointed at the screen. Others covered their mouths. The pastor stuttered, "WH, what is this?" Richard turned to me, his voice low, panicked. "Amara, what have you done?" And I smiled, calmly, slowly. "Nothing. I just wanted you to finish your vow. Go ahead, tell them how much you love me. Tell them I'm your one and only. Tell them about the forever you promised me and promised her too." His face went pale. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. I turned to the crowd, my voice steady and clear through the microphone. "You all came here to witness love, loyalty, and union, but I think you deserve to know the truth." The murmuring stopped. The hall was silent again. "This man," I said, gesturing toward him, "stood before another woman just 3 weeks ago in this very church and said the same vows he was about to say to me. He called her his wife. He called me his fiancée. He planned 2 weddings, one in secret, one in public." Gasps rippled again. I heard someone mutter, "Jesus Christ." Another whispered, "Is that true?" I continued, my hands no longer trembling. While I was choosing flowers and bridesmaid dresses, he was with her. While I dreamt of our honeymoon, he was already living it with his mistress. And while I believed he was faithful, he was living 2 lives. Richard tried to reach for the microphone, but I pulled it back, meeting his eyes, the same eyes that once held warmth, now clouded with shame and fear. "I waited for you to come clean," I said quietly. "I waited for you to be man enough to tell me the truth, but since you couldn't, I decided to do it for you." I turned to the crowd again. Let this be a lesson, not all smiles hide honesty. Not all promises are pure, and not every "I love you" comes from love. I looked back at him one last time, my voice trembling now with emotion, but firm with finality. "You could have had a loyal wife. You chose to make me your fool instead. But today, in front of everyone, I'm taking back my pride." I took off my ring, held it up for everyone to see, and placed it gently on the Bible. This was supposed to seal our forever, but forever doesn't begin with lies. Then I turned and walked down the aisle, this time alone, my veil brushing the marble floor, the crowd parting silently to let me pass. Behind me, chaos erupted, reporters whispering, guests exclaiming, his parents crying, and Richard standing frozen, trapped in the wreckage of his deceit. The wedding vows never came. Only the truth did. And that truth, raw, public, undeniable, became the loudest vow he never spoke. The hall felt colder now, not because of the air conditioning, but because the truth had settled like frost in the air. The crowd that once cheered for love now stared at Richard in silent judgment. He stood there at the altar, motionless at first. Then his lips began to tremble. "Amara, please listen," he stammered, his voice breaking under the weight of 1,000 eyes. "Listen," I echoed softly. "To what, Richard? Another lie?" He reached out, but I stepped back. The gesture made him falter. The same man who once looked so sure of himself, confident, proud, untouchable, was now shaking, sweat glistening on his forehead. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he whispered. "I was going to fix it." "Fix it," I repeated, my voice rising. "You were going to fix a secret marriage. You were going to fix betrayal." The murmurs in the hall grew louder. I could hear my mother's quiet sobs behind me, my maid of honor whispering prayers under her breath. Richard's best man lowered his head, too ashamed to meet my eyes. Then Richard did something I didn't expect. He dropped to his knees. Right there in front of the altar, he knelt, clutching at my gown. "Please, Amara, forgive me." But forgiveness wasn't the issue. Trust was, and trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt with apologies. I looked down at him, not with hatred, but with the sadness of someone who finally saw a truth she had ignored for too long. "Get up," I said softly. "This isn't about forgiveness anymore. It's about consequences." And as he stayed there, trembling and broken, the hall fell into complete silence. The groom had collapsed, not from love, but from the ruin of his own deceit. After that, the whispers began, soft at first, then spreading like a wave across the hall. Did she say secret marriage? Is this real? I heard the other woman lives abroad. Poor girl, she must be devastated. Everywhere I turned, I saw faces, shocked, pitying, judgmental. The same guests who once admired our love story now looked at me like I was part of a tragedy unfolding live. Some reached for their phones, trying to record what was left of the spectacle. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The bridesmaids gathered behind me, confused and heartbroken. Even the pastor looked lost, his Bible still open to the page meant for our vows. I stood still, my fingers clasped tightly around the bouquet. I wanted to cry, but I refused to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I raised my chin and faced the crowd. "I'm sorry you all had to see this," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't plan this for attention or revenge. I planned it for truth, because the man standing before me is the man I fell in love with." A hush fell again. Even the whispers died. Then, from somewhere in the back, I heard clapping, slow, steady, uncertain, and then another, and another, until the hall filled with applause, not for the broken wedding, but for the woman who had the courage to end it. I turned from the altar, my heart pounding but my steps steady. My long white gown trailed behind me, brushing against the red carpet meant to lead me into marriage, now leading me out of it. I didn't look back, not once. The hall seemed endless as I walked past the crowd. Cameras flashed. People moved aside quietly, as though parting a path for dignity itself. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, each step echoing with finality. Outside, the afternoon sun hit my face. It was warm, golden, almost poetic. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I stood there in the sunlight, still in my wedding dress, veil slightly tilted, mascara smudged but free. Truly free. My best friend ran out after me, tears in her eyes. "Amara, wait, are you okay?" I smiled faintly. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." Because in that moment, I realized something powerful. I hadn't lost love. I had escaped a lie. By evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, messages, mentions, videos. Someone had recorded the entire scene, the confrontation, the silence, the moment I walked away. Within hours, it was everywhere. Bride exposes cheating groom at the altar. Viral wedding scandal. Love turns to lies. People who didn't know me spoke my name. News blogs wrote stories. Some called me brave, others called me dramatic, but I didn't care about any of it. I sat in my room that night, still in my wedding gown, hair undone, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. For the first time, I saw not a broken bride, but a woman who refused to be deceived. The story had spread beyond the walls of the church, but for me, it wasn't about fame or pity. It was about closure. He had tried to build a life of lies. I had chosen to end it with truth. And though the world would remember that wedding for its scandal, I would remember it for something else, the day I chose myself. The weeks after the wedding felt like a blur, a long stretch of silence where even the ticking clock sounded loud. The headlines eventually disappeared, the gossip faded, and life somehow went on. At first, I hid. I stopped answering calls, stopped going to work, and stayed off social media. Everywhere I turned, I saw memories, the dress hanging by the door, the invitations I never threw away, the ring I still couldn't bring myself to touch. But one morning, I woke up and decided I was done crying over someone who never deserved my tears. I opened the curtains, let the sunlight in, and took a deep breath that felt like the first real one in months. I took off the engagement ring and placed it in a small box, not out of bitterness, but acceptance. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. Not because I was healed, but because I knew I would be. I cut my hair short. It felt symbolic, like shedding the last traces of who I used to be. I returned to work, kept my head high despite the curious glances, and slowly rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. I started therapy, took a short creative writing course I had always dreamed of, and began journaling. Each word helped me stitch together the parts of me that heartbreak had torn apart. Some nights I still thought of Richard, the laughter, the memories, the betrayal. But the pain no longer controlled me. I realized his betrayal was the universe's way of redirecting me toward myself. Months later, I passed by a wedding hall, white flowers, laughter, music drifting in the air. I didn't flinch. I smiled. Because love no longer frightened me, I just understood it better. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I had peace. And that, I realized, was the kind of happy ending every woman deserves. Not walking down the aisle, but walking back into her own life stronger, wiser, and whole. Life felt peaceful, not loud or perfect, just steady. And in that peace, something in me began to bloom again. It started small. A few messages from women who had seen my story online, asking how I healed, how I found the strength to walk away, how I learned to love again. At first, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't a counselor, I was just a woman who had survived. But the more I spoke to them, the more I realized healing isn't just for oneself. It's something meant to be shared. So I started a small online group, a safe space where women could talk about betrayal, heartbreak, and rediscovering self-worth. I called it the Second Chance Circle. Every week we met, sometimes virtually, sometimes in person, and I listened to their stories. Some cried as they spoke, others laughed through their pain, and a few sat silently, just taking in the comfort of being understood. With time, it grew. I partnered with a local organization, and soon I began holding counseling sessions for women, those who had been cheated on, abandoned, or left doubting their worth. I shared my story not as a tragedy, but as a testimony. Forgive, I would tell them, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Some days I'd look around the room at the faces of women who once felt broken, and I'd see strength shining through their eyes. It reminded me of who I used to be and how far I had come. I had once stood at an altar shattered by lies, but now I stood in rooms filled with women learning to rebuild their lives. And every time one of them smiled again, Every time a tear turned into laughter, I felt a quiet joy in my heart. Maybe that was the real reason for everything that had happened, not just to break me, but to prepare me to help others rise too. I didn't just find love again. I found meaning. And this time, it wasn't about the perfect wedding. It was about the beautiful life that followed.